I actually said to the board in the first phone call, are you sure of doing this? Because
really?
They will not like you.
September 2022, Thomas Tuchel walks out of Stamford Bridge for the last time as Chelsea manager.
Chelsea Football Club have just sacked their manager, Thomas Tuchel.
7 games into the season, that's all it took. There was no meltdown, no player mutiny, no string of humiliating defeats. Just 4 months before, he'd lifted the Club World Cup with Chelsea's badge on his chest. 18 months before that, a Champions League trophy in Porto. The new owner said it plainly: we don't share the same vision.
Our vision for the club was finding a manager who really wanted to collaborate with us.
And honestly, most people shrugged it off. They called Tuchel difficult, stubborn, someone who couldn't play nice with the suits upstairs. But something about it felt off, because what happened next wasn't a fresh start. It was a free fall. Chelsea spent over £600 million trying to find themselves. They went through 5 managers like they were auditioning understudies. The tactics scrambled, the identity gone, the direction anyone's guess. Big name managers were approached and politely declined. Young coaches came in hopeful and left looking shell-shocked. Club legends returned to help and found themselves drowning. And slowly, quietly, those difficult things Tuchel had been saying, they started sounding less like complaints and more like prophecy. This isn't just about a manager getting sacked. It's about what happens when a football club changes hands and maybe loses something it can't buy back. So let's rewind. Let's trace it from the beginning, from Tuchel's exit to Potter's impossible job to Lampard's and Pochettino's sad stories to where we are now. This is the story Chelsea didn't want anyone to piece together, and the warning sign we all missed.
Full-time whistle. Chelsea have won the Champions League.
When Thomas Tuchel lifted the Champions League trophy with Chelsea FC in May 2021, he didn't just save a season, he restored order. Within 4 months of taking over mid-campaign, Chelsea conceded just 2 goals in 7 knockout matches, eliminated Atletico Madrid, Porto, Real Madrid, and outmaneuvered Manchester City in the final.
Kai Havertz, who is around Ederson, and Havertz scores for Chelsea.
Tactically, structurally, psychologically, the team made sense again. That context matters, because by the time Chelsea changed ownership in May 2022, Tuchel wasn't a fading coach clinging to past success. He was the club's most credible football authority, but the environment around him changed overnight.
How would you describe your relationship with him?
Very intense.
The takeover by BlueCo, fronted publicly by Todd Bailey and Clear Lake Capital, dismantled Chelsea's old power structure almost immediately. Marina Granovskaya exited, Petr Cech followed. The buffer between ownership and the head coach disappeared. Suddenly, Tuchel wasn't just coaching the team, he was being asked to help run the club. Recruitment meetings became longer, strategic conversations broader. Ownership wanted constant alignment, not just on tactics, but on squad planning, long-term profiles, and market opportunities. Bailey would later describe Tuchel's dismissal as a result of a lack of shared vision, not results. That phrase would become pivotal. Tuchel, by his own admission in later interviews, never wanted that expanded remit. He is a training ground coach, obsessive, detail-driven, focused on structure and preparation. Under Abramovich, others handled recruitment. Under BlueCo, that separation vanished. The friction surfaced quickly. During the summer of 2022, Chelsea spent over £250 million on players including Sterling, Koulibaly, Cucurella, and Fofana. Yet internally, alignment was fragile. There were disagreements over profiles, priorities, and timing. Reports emerged of owner-driven interest in marquee names, including Cristiano Ronaldo, a move Tuchel strongly opposed on footballing grounds. More damaging than the disagreements themselves was how they were handled. Tuchel reportedly preferred focused football discussions. The owners wanted constant engagement, meetings were missed, messages filtered through intermediaries. Trust eroded quietly, and then came the results. Chelsea lost 3 of their opening 7 matches in the 2022/23 season, including a chaotic 3-0 defeat at Leeds and a flat loss to Dinamo Zagreb in the Champions League. The performances were uneven, but far from catastrophic. Chelsea sat 6th in the league. Qualification was still firmly in reach. Yet on September 7th, 2022, 2022, Tuchel was dismissed after a short morning meeting at Cobham. His public response was restrained. No accusations, no naming names, just a statement saying Chelsea felt like home and that the decision hurt more because of the relationships he'd built. At the time, many sided with the owners. New regime, new direction, fresh start. But in hindsight, this wasn't a manager losing the dressing room. It was a manager losing alignment with a system that was still learning how football actually works. And the warning Tuchel represented wasn't about ego. It was about what happens when football authority is diluted and decisions drift away from the pitch. Chelsea chose to move forward without him. What followed would make that choice impossible to ignore. When Thomas Tuchel was dismissed, the message from Chelsea's hierarchy was clear. This wasn't a knee-jerk decision. It was a strategic reset. The club wanted a head coach who would fully buy into the new ownership model. Someone collaborative, someone comfortable working within a multi-layered structure where recruitment, long-term squad planning, and sporting strategy sat above the dugout. That search led them to Graham Potter. At the time, the appointment made sense on paper. Potter had built a reputation at Brighton and Hove Albion as one of the Premier League's most progressive thinkers. His Brighton side routinely ranked near the top for expected goals build-up, positional rotations, and pressing efficiency, all achieved with limited budgets and patient recruitment. More importantly, Potter fit the ownership profile. He was articulate, flexible, comfortable discussing process over outcomes, willing to operate inside a broader sporting framework rather than dominate it. Chelsea handed him a 5-year contract, a clear signal that this was meant to be a long-term project, not a short-term gamble. But the reality he walked into was nothing like Brighton. Between the summer of 2022 and January 2023, Chelsea spent over £600 million on new players. More than 15 first-team signings arrived in a 6-month window. The squad ballooned beyond 30 senior professionals. Tactical continuity became almost impossible. Potter was rotating constantly, not out of indecision, but necessity. In his first 31 matches, Chelsea used more than 25 different starting lineups. Partnerships never settled. Roles changed weekly. The injury list grew. Reece James, Ben Chilwell, N'Golo Kanté, Wesley Fofana all missed extended periods. Results reflected the chaos. Across all competitions, Potter won 12 of his 31 matches. In the Premier League alone, Chelsea scored just 23 goals in 22 league games under him. Relegation-level output for a squad assembled at historic cost. The Champions League run briefly masked the deeper issues. Chelsea eliminated Borussia Dortmund and reached the quarterfinals, but even those nights felt fragile. Moments rather than momentum. What began as patience slowly turned into paralysis. Potter lacked the authority to impose clarity on a bloated, expensive dressing room. Senior players looked unconvinced. Younger signings looked overwhelmed. And the hierarchy, despite preaching long-term thinking, grew visibly uneasy as Stamford Bridge turned restless. In April 2023, Potter was dismissed. The project coach, hired to bring stability, became another casualty of instability. And that's where Chelsea made their next revealing decision. Rather than doubling down on structure, they reached backward. Frank Lampard was appointed as interim head coach for the final weeks of the season. The logic was emotional, not strategic. Lampard was familiar, trusted, a club legend who could absorb criticism while the board regrouped. There was no illusion of a long-term plan. This was about buying time, but the football consequences were brutal. Lampard lost 9 of his 11 matches. Chelsea failed to win a single Premier League game under him. The team finished 12th, their lowest league position in nearly 3 decades. From Tuchel to Potter to Lampard, Chelsea had now cycled through 3 radically different managers in 7 months, all under the same ownership philosophy, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Each appointment was justified with a new explanation, each dismissal blamed on context, but the underlying structure never changed. Managers were asked to adapt to the system, not shape it. Authority was fragmented. Decision-making remained distant from the pitch. By the end of the 2022/23 season, Chelsea weren't just underperforming, they were directionless, and that's when a deeper question began to surface. Quietly at first, then louder with every failed reset. Was this club actually built for elite managers anymore? Because while Chelsea were cycling through coaches, some of the most proven names in European football were watching and hesitating. That hesitation would soon become decisive. By the summer of 2023, Chelsea were no longer just searching for a head coach. They were searching for validation consolidation. 2 managerial appointments had collapsed in under a year. Over £600 million had been spent. The squad was the youngest in the Premier League, yet one of the most expensive ever assembled. And crucially, confidence in the ownership's football judgment was beginning to fray, not just among fans, but across the European coaching elite. This was the moment Chelsea needed a heavyweight, someone whose authority could reset the dressing room and re-anchor the club's identity. Naturally, the names linked were significant. One of them was Hansi Flick. Flick's resume spoke for itself. At Bayern Munich, he had delivered one of the most dominant seasons in modern football, a historic treble in 2019/20, winning the Bundesliga, DFB Pokal, and Champions League. His Bayern side averaged 2.9 goals per game, pressed relentlessly, and played with a clarity Chelsea had completely lost. But Flick also represented something BlueCo had not yet embraced, a manager who expects control over football matters. Flick's success was built on trust between coach and structure, not on fragmented authority or committee-led decision-making. And while Chelsea admired him, the fit was never clean. Conversations never moved decisively forward. At the same time, another familiar name entered the frame, one with unfinished business at Stamford Bridge: Mauricio Pochettino. After leaving Paris Saint-Germain, Pochettino was openly available. He had Premier League credibility, he had managed elite dressing rooms, and most importantly, he was willing to engage. Talks progressed far enough that Pochettino traveled to Stamford Bridge for meetings with Chelsea's hierarchy. This wasn't a speculative link, it was real, advanced dialogue. Yet even here, hesitation lingered. Pochettino, like Tuchel before him, values training ground authority and clear sporting lines. He wants influence on squad balance, leadership profiles, and dressing room hierarchy. Chelsea, meanwhile, were still refining a model where recruitment and long-term planning sat firmly above the head coach. The delay was telling. In the end, Chelsea did appoint Pochettino, but only after months of uncertainty and with a framework that still limited managerial autonomy. Even then, the marriage was fragile from the outset. Under Pochettino in 2023/24, Chelsea's league form improved marginally, but the structural problems remained. The team finished 6th, scored 77 league goals, yet conceded 63, a number more in line with mid-table sides than Champions League contenders. Injuries continued. Defensive leadership was inconsistent. Game control fluctuated wildly. Pochettino himself would later speak about the difficulty of managing such a young squad, assembled without a clear hierarchy of experience. And then, once again, Chelsea reset. Another coach gone. Another project reframed. By this point, a pattern had fully emerged, one that Tuchel had sensed early, and others were now navigating cautiously. Elite coaches weren't rejecting Chelsea because of money. They weren't rejecting Chelsea because of history. They were wary of structure. Because at Chelsea under BlueCo, the head coach was no longer the final football authority. He was a component, important, visible, but ultimately replaceable within a broader system that prioritized long-term assets, age profiles, and financial models. For some managers, that was acceptable. For the elite, it was a red flag. And with every stalled negotiation, every cautious meeting, and every short-lived appointment, Tuchel's discomfort began to look less like resistance and more like recognition. Chelsea were no longer just choosing managers. Managers were choosing whether Chelsea was worth the compromise. By the time Chelsea hit their next fresh start, there was no hiding it anymore. The cracks weren't in the tactics or the personnel, they were in the foundation itself. From the outside, Chelsea still looked like a powerhouse. Big signings, bold statements, talk of long-term vision in every press conference. But inside the building, something fundamental had shifted. The manager was no longer in charge of the football. This wasn't about finding the right coach anymore. It was about whether any coach could actually lead under this setup. Under BlueCo, Chelsea had quietly become something different. Recruitment was handled by committees. Squad building followed spreadsheets, age profiles, resale values, data models. Decisions were made across departments, not by one football mind. And the head coach? He became the guy who worked with what he was given. Which brings us to Enzo Maresca. Maresca wasn't a panic hire. He's smart, modern, tactically sharp, but more than that, he represents a type of manager this ownership wanted. At Leicester, his football was all about control. His team averaged over 65% possession in the championship. They completed more passes than anyone else in the league. Every pattern was rehearsed. Every movement had a purpose. The system was king. For Chelsea's owners, that was the dream. Maresca doesn't demand total control. He believes in structure, in repetition, in building something over time. He's comfortable working inside a framework where recruitment and strategy are already decided, and his job is to coach the players, not shape the vision. But here's the problem. Chelsea aren't Leicester. The Premier League isn't the championship, and Stamford Bridge isn't a place where you get time to experiment. Chelsea's squad, despite being young, is one of the most expensive ever put together. The expectations are sky high. The pressure is suffocating. Every mistake gets dissected on live TV. And the system? Still the same. So Maresca walks into a situation where he inherits a squad built by 3 different sporting directors with 3 different ideas. Hardly any experienced leaders to lean on. Players signed as much for their Instagram following as their football fit. Fans who are exhausted from watching the same movie over and over. And this is where Tuchel's warning lands with full force. Tuchel didn't push back because he was a control freak. He pushed back because he understood something that matters in elite football. Someone has to be in charge. Not a committee, not a collaborative process, not endless meetings where everyone nods and no one decides. One voice, one vision, one person who says, this is how we're doing it. Since Tuchel, Chelsea have gone through 5 managers in less than 3 years, finished 12th, then 6th in the league. This is the paradox BlueCo built. They want long-term thinking in the most short-term league on earth. They want project managers in a place that eats projects for breakfast. They want control, but don't want to look like they're controlling. And Maresca, he's standing right in the middle of that mess. If he succeeds, the system gets the credit. If he fails, the system moves on, untouched. And that's why Tuchel's exit still echoes. Because he wasn't just the first manager sacked under this ownership, he was the first one who saw it coming. So far, Chelsea's story under BlueCo has been about chaos, managerial carousels, endless resets, and a structure that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. But here's where things get complicated, because under Enzo Maresca, something unexpected happened. It actually started working. In his first full season, Maresca did what most people thought was still a pipe dream. Chelsea finished 4th in the Premier League in 2024/25. Champions League football was back at Stamford Bridge for the first time since 2022/23. The numbers weren't earth-shattering. 69 points, 20 wins, 9 draws, 9 defeats, plus 21 goal difference. But look at the context. This was still one of the youngest squads in the league. A team thrown together across multiple transfer windows, still recovering from years of chaos and constant managerial changes. In that mess, finishing top 4 wasn't just progress. It felt like pulling order out of thin air. And it wasn't just the league. On May 28, 2025, Chelsea lifted the UEFA Conference League trophy. In the final against Real Betis, they went behind early, but they didn't panic. Maresca adjusted, the team regrouped, and then they took over, winning 4-1. Goals from Enzo Fernandez, Nicolas Jackson, Jadon Sancho, and Moises Caicedo. A glimpse of what Maresca was building. Young, technical, disciplined, and dangerous. That win, it meant something bigger. Chelsea became the first club ever to win all 4 of UEFA's major trophies. This wasn't theory anymore. It was real. It was silverware. Then came the summer, and everything felt possible. In July 2025, Chelsea won the FIFA Club World Cup, and they didn't just win it, they dominated it. In the final against PSG, Chelsea didn't scrape by. They demolished them 3-0. Cole Palmer put on a clinic in the first half. 2 goals, 1 assist. By halftime, it was over. Palmer walked away with the golden ball. Robert Sanchez took home the golden glove. By the time the 2025/26 season rolled around, Maresca's CV looked untouchable. Top 4 finish European Trophy World Champions, which is exactly why what happened next feels so jarring, because Chelsea didn't sack a manager who failed. They sacked one who won. But here's the thing, success changed everything. After top 4 and 2 trophies, Chelsea weren't a project anymore. They were contenders. The patience that once bought time for mistakes, gone. Every lineup decision, every tactical tweak, every dropped point, it all carried more weight now. The new season started well, convincing away wins, big performances in Europe, even with heavy rotation. There was this growing belief that the system was strong enough to carry the team no matter who played. Through November, things still looked solid, but cracks were forming beneath the surface. Rotation became relentless. Defensive partnerships never had time to gel. Some games, Chelsea looked unstoppable. Others, they looked shaky. When the system clicked, they could tear anyone apart. But when things got tight, the margins felt razor thin. By By late autumn, Chelsea were living in two worlds at once. In one, Maresca's structure could break down elite teams with ease. In the other, there was no room left to breathe. And that tension, that's what matters. Because everything that came next, the December collapse, the strained press conferences, the whispers behind closed doors, and eventually the decision itself, only makes sense if you remember one thing. Enzo Maresca was never hired just to survive at Chelsea. He was hired to transform it, and the moment transformation became expectation, the system that once supported him started to suffocate him instead. This is where Chelsea's story gets genuinely uncomfortable, because once Enzo Maresca actually delivered real results, actual trophies, there were no more excuses left. And when the excuses run out, everyone starts looking around for someone to blame. Under BlueCo, Chelsea had always sold instability as the price of progress. Youth takes time, turnover is inevitable, a new model needs space to breathe before you judge it, but success rewrites the script. After finishing 4th, winning the Conference League, and lifting the Club World Cup, Chelsea weren't a project anymore. They were, by their own achievements, a club that should be competing now, and that's when the pressure really kicked in. The 2025/26 season didn't fall apart immediately. In fact, early on, it looked like things were clicking. Chelsea rotated heavily in Europe and still cruised through. Away form was solid. The depth they'd spent years building, it seemed to be working. But if you looked closer, things weren't as stable as they seemed. The underlying numbers told a different story. Possession stayed high, often above 60%, but chance creation swung wildly. Brilliant one week, toothless the next, defensively, shaky. Partnerships kept changing week to week. Maresca's style depends on rhythm and repetition. But how do you build rhythm when your lineup changes every 3 days? Rotation, what was supposed to be a strength, became a survival tactic. Squad management turned into a tightrope walk. Protect the young players, but also win now because no one's patient anymore. Inside the club, something shifted. Ownership had backed the system. The system had delivered trophies. But now the question hanging in the air was simple and dangerous. Why doesn't this feel sustainable? And this is where Tuchel's warning comes back, louder than ever. Elite football isn't just about your system working when everything's going well. It's about holding together when things go sideways. By December, Chelsea were struggling. Results dipped. Control slipped. One week they'd dominate. The next they'd look lost. Games that should have been managed started to feel chaotic, and the reaction wasn't calm. Press conferences got tense. Maresca's answers became more cautious, more corporate. He started sounding less like a manager in charge and more like someone defending a boardroom decision. That shift, that matters. Because under this ownership, the head coach is expected to absorb pressure, not push back against it. When things go wrong, the system doesn't adjust. The manager does. Behind closed doors, the meetings piled up, long-term metrics were discussed, development curves were analyzed, data was reviewed. But on the pitch, football doesn't care about your spreadsheets. This is the paradox Chelsea built. They designed a system to eliminate chaos, but chaos keeps coming back, just with a different name each time. Tuchel saw it early. Potter got crushed by it. Lampard barely survived it. Pochettino tiptoed around it. Maresca delivered inside it and still couldn't escape it. And that's the clearest sign of all. When success doesn't buy you stability, something deeper is broken. Chelsea didn't fire a failing manager. They did what they always do when the pressure mounts. Change the coach, keep the system. Which brings us to the question no one at Stamford Bridge seems able to answer. If winning trophies doesn't buy you time at Chelsea anymore, what the hell does? When Thomas Tuchel spoke about a lack of shared vision, it sounded abstract, almost political. At the time, it was easy to dismiss, easier still to believe Chelsea were simply moving forward. But years later, the pattern is unmistakable. Different managers, different styles, different promises, the same outcome. From Tuchel to Potter, from Lampard to Pochettino, and even under Enzo Maresca, results changed. Trophies arrived, yet stability never followed. That's the warning Tuchel gave without ever raising his voice. The question now isn't about the next coach. It's whether Chelsea are finally ready to listen.